will. And then, luckily, in most cases, the person sort of is such a state of shock that they break out of this sort of mind control, and then they slam the door. But there are a lot of weird cases like that where it was as if the black-eyed children could take control of the mind of the person.
Yes. And, like even reaching for car locks. It may have been Brian's account that I read where it said that he found himself actually reaching for the door lock on the car to open it.
Was the first one, I think, to report that angle of people's minds sort of being controlled by whatever these things are. But what's interesting is that the stories and reports of the black-eyed children are actually quite similar to the Men in Black stories. Now, when people think of the Men in Black, they think of Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, with the movies. But
yes.
The reality of the situation is the real Men in Black are nothing like government agents or anything along those lines at all. Like the black-eyed kids, the Men in Black are typically described as like really skinny, pale. They have these large eyes, not black eyes, but large eyes, which they hide behind these wraparound sunglasses.
Mm-hmm.
But they seem to have the ability to sort of mind control people as well. But if you read the witness testimonies, they actually don't really sound human. They sound almost like something that's trying to camouflage itself as human, but they're not doing a perfect job of it.
I perceive that as, just from descriptions that I've heard and eyewitnesses that I've had an opportunity to discuss this with, it's almost like reptilians who are having to come forward because there's something else going on. Somebody's had an experience. And I know that you and I kind of had a chuckle because you had told me that the Men in Black would be a great place to start with your writings. And thinking that I had bought your book, I'm going through it and I can't find you, and I'm thinking, well, he must be writing commentary through this other. I picked up Gray Parker's book.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
that's it. But that was so odd.
Yeah, he wrote the first book on the Men in Black back in 1956, a book called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers.
Yes.
And it told the story of a guy named Albert Bender who lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut, who set up a UFO group called the International Flying Saucer Bureau. But in no time after setting the group up, Bender was visited by these three Men in Black. And that's where the term actually goes way back to like 1952, 51. And but Bender said the Men in Black were not like government people. He said they're almost like today's shadow people, for people who might have heard of them. They're like a shadowy figure that materialized through the wall of his bedroom and then sort of psychically threatened him to walk away from the subject or else. And Albert Bender kind of ignored it for a while, and then he started to get sick and ill, which is something you get in a number of these cases. When you're in proximity to them, people fall ill and sick, as if almost like a supernatural infection kind of thing. And eventually Albert Bender did walk away from it all, left the whole subject behind and never looked back. And he only died 2 years ago at the age of 94. So, getting away from them actually worked in his favor. But Gray Barker's book told the story, and then before he quit completely, Albert Bender wrote his own kind of autobiography about his encounters with the Men in Black, and that book was called Flying Saucers and the Three Men, and the
Yes.
three men being the MIB that visited him. But it's kind of ironic, that the movie version portrays them so strongly as government agents, but practically all the witnesses describe them as sort of looking almost like the Walking Dead. They're sort of pale and sickly looking and gaunt, and they kind of walk in a jerky fashion. And as I said, they sort of look vaguely like us, but you look too close to them and you'll see, a lot of really weird differences.
Very odd differences. The footage that was caught in the hotel entrance in, was it Switzerland or Sweden, of the men? There was footage caught, or a photo taken from security footage of the two men coming in and either, was it Switzerland or Sweden, coming into the hotel?
Oh, no, that was right here in the United States.
It was in the U.S.? Okay.
Yeah, just a couple of years ago. That's an interesting one because it kind of, caught a lot of people's attention, this film footage taken in a lobby in a hotel. And you've got these two guys just standing out, just bizarre with black suits and skinny black ties and white shirts and these old-style sort of 1950s hats. Mm-hmm. And the staff there did talk about it and said, well, yeah, we got them on film, and they were weird and everybody was talking about them, and then they vanished. But, the interesting thing is there was no attempt to kind of jump on the bandwagon and create a big, publicity thing on the part of the hotel staff. They were kind of like, they talked about it reluctantly, and then the whole thing was dropped because they just didn't want to really deal with it. But you can find that footage online of these,
yes.
These two guys sort of striding through the lobby of the hotel, and it's sort of it's interesting because there actually aren't too many photographs of the Men in Black. As far as I know, that's the only piece of footage, and I'm only aware of about 4 or 5 photographs that have been taken over the years of a Man in Black. So in that sense, it was kind of a breakthrough on the subject.
Well, I'm always shocked that there isn't more on that, because when I was reading Parker's book describing the experiences that all of those men went through, the people were very blatant about how they approached their homes when their families were there. Their phones would have obvious clicks and stuff indicating wiretapping.
Yeah.
In the day, I mean, they were not reticent about making their presence known whatsoever.
No, that's one of the things that the Men in Black are very good at doing. They turn up on people's doorsteps, threaten people. In some cases, they kind of allude to the idea that someone might die. But as far as I know, there's only 1 or 2 cases that fall into that category. But what they tend to do is that they're very good at threatening people and frightening them to where they don't need to take it any further because the person backs away usually from the subject anyway, just like Albert Bender did.
Yes.
So, in that sense, they're sort of psychologically very good at terrifying people. And you get a lot of weird things, like people wake up in the middle of the night, the phone's ringing, and of course, if you hear the phone ring in the middle of the night, everybody worries It's bad news, so you answer the phone. But in many of these cases, after the Men in Black have visited, the witnesses have reported getting strange static and odd noises on the phone, like electronic bleeping noises at like 2, 3 a.m., almost as if it's like an attempt to destabilize people by, affecting their sleep patterns and frightening them and worrying that the Men in Black are going to come back. So, they're very good at, putting people into that sort of negative state of fear.
Well, and that does permeate every aspect of your life. If you have a situation that's going on that's that unsettling, that's, I would have probably walked away too. And a surprising number of those people involved with the group did not. So they were very fierce.
Yeah, I mean, different people have taken like a different approach to the Men in Black. There are some cases where people have told them to sort of get the hell out of the house. And The weird thing is they don't sort of try and fight back. It's almost like you put a glitch in their approach, and people they don't seem to know what to do, and they quickly leave. It's almost as if the image of these sort of dangerous figures, which they clearly seem to be, but you stand up against them. And then in a number of the cases, the witnesses have said it was as if, quite literally, like you put a glitch in them and they didn't know what to do or how to handle it. And, as if they were programmed in some way, and then the program had been affected,
Well, that happens with visitations that people have even when they're not abducted by greys, right?
Well,
that you can throw them off somehow.
Yeah, and I think, if it's like anything that when you're dealing with the supernatural, if you've got the sort of the strength to say, leave, go away, I think just the power of the sheer emotion, if you like, can sort of put up a barrier that keeps these things away. And I think the more vulnerable you are, complete opposite to that, if you're vulnerable, it's very easy to get, for these supernatural things, to get their grips into someone who may have sort of low self-esteem or unsure about themselves, things like that. I think people like that are far more in danger of falling, into the clutches of these things, and because their character, is something that is easy to manipulate.
Yes. Well, that's an interesting point. My grandmother, I've often said, was New Age before New Age was cool. And she was very aware of psychic ability. She was very into astrology. She was just an interesting woman for her time period. When things would come up in discussions like Ouija boards and that kind of thing, even back then, she was like, you don't do something that has the potential to invite something in. When the movie The Exorcist came out, she adamantly refused to allow me to watch it with her. Like, I was sent from the room. I was a teenager. I was like 14 or 15 years old. And I was so affronted by that I just couldn't imagine, why are you being so mean? I might like that. She was like, you don't need to expose yourself to things that can have supernatural powers. You don't know what will be the invitation.
Well, that's one of the things I always tell people is that, if you get into the supernatural and the paranormal, just be careful of what you're getting into, because, sometimes, as I said, you have people who are, their character might not be too strong and these things can overpower them. But you also have the angle of, people deliberately trying to invoke supernatural entities, whether through a Ouija board or other means, that's sort of occult rituals, that kind of thing. Now, I always tell people that it's actually not that difficult to open a door and get something to come through, so to speak. It's much more difficult to dispatch it back where it came from,
Absolutely true.
And I know this because there was a time when, I was trying to figure out what all these things were, and I did get quite involved in things like ritualistic magic and things like this. And what I found was that every time I tried to do something along those lines, something bad would happen, like bad luck, runs of bad luck, or you would just sense like a weird, dark atmosphere over you, and things would start to go wrong.
Yes.
And I saw this as a clear thing that happened every time I got into this, and so I realized that it's either you keep doing this and you keep pushing and things get worse, or you have to find a way to try and get the answers without getting hauled into this supernatural world where clearly we do not really stand much of a chance against.
No, we are not armed.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have to interrupt because we are late for our break, but we'll be back in 2 minutes, and enjoy this. Be right back.